How's it going, everybody? So here I am with the other deck list that I took to Nationals, and I knew basically from the time I qualified that one of my two decks was going to be Rydia in some form or fashion. Rydia is what got me qualified for the tourney. I was very certain that Rydia was going to be one of my decks, and I knew that people would be ready for Rydia. I knew that Rydia was very good, but I also knew that this deck has been flexible and powerful enough to get through that. Was not Rydia's tournament. I think this deck is still very, very good, but there are some flaws in this deck that I'll get to towards the end, and I'll kind of explain what and how I would have changed the list had I been able to do it again. So if you're unfamiliar with Rydia, and I mean if you're watching this channel you shouldn't be, I've talked about this card at length, but Rydia is maybe one of the most powerful cards ever printed in the game. It's a 2CP 5k that has immunity to damage from summons or abilities. And anytime herself or another character from Final Fantasy IV enters the field, she gains 2 counters. And then, as an action ability, once per turn, you can cast a summon for free that costs less than the number of counters on Rydia. And this is incredibly powerful. For reference, we have cards like Maya, which give a 3 CP discount on summons once per turn, but that removes the summon from the game. Rydia doesn't remove the summons. The casting summon doesn't remove the counters from Rydia, so you don't have to continually build them. In general, once you get her to 4 counters, she can cast everything from here below. And once she gets to 6, every summon in the deck can be cast for free once per turn with Rydia. She is maybe one of the most efficient CP generating engines in the game. And on top of that, she is very difficult to remove. She just kind of sits there, in some matchups like Mono Fire don't have a convincing way to get rid of this card. And the new stuff with Rydia this set was we printed the new Cecil. And Rydia has had a problem for a long time where she liked Porum and she liked Palom, and she didn't have a ton of other great Category 4 friends she wanted to play with. Fusoya was very good if you wanted to go for a rainbow build. A lot of mono, like Earth Water builds would go for Ursula. Ursula Reviving Gang would get her to 6 counters, but like Ursula Reviving Gang is not a power play. It was just a play that was passable enough to be worth it, especially when you combine it with the power of Sophie. Cecil fixes all of those problems. Cecil is by himself a 6 counter Rydia and also adds protection. The Wind Paladin Cecil and the Water Paladin Cecil both have different purposes, but they allow you to keep Rydia safe against the removal threats that are targeting her, which is very, very important. Something like the Wind Cecil, choose Rydia, they pay the extra 2, and then you Amot it, is sometimes enough to win the game if you get there quickly enough. Additionally, we have a new Rosa this set, and this Rosa is very good. This deck tends to skew very water heavy, which is nice, but it does mean that sometimes it's hard to get your Rydias on the field, or it also helps you color fix your Cecil. I had multiple judge calls this weekend of going Rydia into Rosa into Cecil for a discard. People are like, well, you didn't pay for Cecil properly. But Cecil is an alternate cast condition, not an action ability. So Rydia allows you to pay for Cecil with just a discard, which is fantastic. That gets you a draw, it gets you the Rydia counters, and it gets the Cecil onto the field, which is huge. So she ends up refueling the hand, which is good because the big thing Rydia lost in the last set was Sildra. Sildra was the lifeblood of Rydia decks. Your first Rydia, generally, her goal was to cast Sildra between 2, 3, 4 times before the turn would go. The kind of goal, the play pattern of Rydia was Sildra my turn, Amot opponents. Sildra my turn, Amot opponents. So we had to find a replacement summon, and what I came to was 3CP Leviathan EX. You'll see this in a lot of other lists, but just kind of something independently that I found and ended up being very, very good in the list. This allows us to kind of filter towards our Amaterasus, towards our Mist Dragons, towards our protective spells for our Rydia. And it also allows us to get these Cecils back in the deck. If you're familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh terms, the Wind Cecil is a hard garnet. If it's in your hand, you can only cast it if you have a Rosa on the field. So anytime you can get it back on the deck with a Leviathan or a Loporrit, it actually becomes a live card again. And for that reason, this Leviathan kind of ends up being like multiple waves advantage. You get to draw 2 cards and then put a card from your hand back into the deck that you want in the deck and not in the break zone or in your hand. Ends up being very, very powerful. Also, being able to stack EX Burst. If your opponent attacks, you can go Leviathan, stack a Riku, stack a Remora, stack a Leviathan, and you just kind of win the game when that happens, right? Like, the amount of advantage that you accrue is pretty much unmatched. So let's do kind of the card by card. So finishing out the rest of the 4 package, we have a full 3 copies of Purim. I was very afraid of the Fiend. In 6 especially. 6 has been on a tricolor list, and Purim is very good against that. Purim is good against Shinryu, does very well into Lena Leviathan. You can Purim the Lena and then Mist Dragon to stop the Leviathan from entering the field. She stops Shinryu because you target the Shinryu on the stack of the search, and they can't do the tidal wave to wipe the field. It is very good against Category 6 because 5 CP lock will draw them 1 card before it doesn't do anything. Edgar's target will lose its ability on the stack. He doesn't get to do anything. Just a very, very good utility card, and she's getting better and better all the time. I would not be surprised if this card just honestly never leaves sight for water decks. She's just that good and that generally usable. Something you'll notice is a little different from when I was playing Rainbow. I used to be on just 1 Garnet. We're on 2. We're trying to up the count of summoners for Riku, which is the other new thing that was kind of, I don't want to say discovered, but this was kind of the new idea, was that you could play Riku instead of Warrior of Light to kind of have a similar removal and like value engine effect, while also having maybe one of the best EX bursts in the game. We have 8 EXs in this deck that could be a possible +1 or +2s. And Riku is maybe the best of those. It's the best type of removal in the game. It's a draw, does everything. And Garnet or Rydia have to be on the field for Riku to do her thing. We're on a 3-2-1 Cecil split. I wouldn't change this. The Water Cecil is technically optional, but I knew that going into day 2, because open deck list is a thing, you end up with the ability to go Rydia Cecil, pass. And your opponent can't do something that targets Rydia because you can, in response, tag into the Water Cecil and blanket for the cost of the crystal that Cecil generates. This is not the ideal Cecil most of the time. Usually you want the discounted rate on the Wind Cecil, and this does lock you out of that. But it's a generally good card by itself. And the mind game of saying you cannot choose my Rydia with an ability to remove her is enough to make him worth the deck slot. The full 3 copies of Une, this was pretty self-explanatory. It's the reason to be playing Earth Water in general. For our summon lineup, we have 2 Kusith, a full 3 Mist Dragon. I thought there'd be a lot of Mono Lightning with cards like Ixion and such. A lot of Mono Water. Mist Dragon tends to be very good in that matchup due to preventing Lena from being able to revive things over the course of the game. A lot of Earth Lightning, Chaos Arc, removing arcs on the stack and blanking mana black for literally free with Rydia ends up being just a very powerful form of disruption. A lot of Scions. Scions tend to play out of the break zone. Continuously removing that with Mist Dragon just ends up being a good thing to do. The full 3 copies of Leviathan EX. The full 3 copies of Amont. This is back in full force and extremely necessary in the current format. Amont is as good as it has ever been. And this is still the deck that best makes use of Amont. Getting this card for free is extremely powerful. Especially with stuff like Kryl, with Garnet, with Une. You kind of get into this lock situation where you have Une, Rydia, Amaterasu, and you just kind of win the game there. 1 copy of Fenrir. This came up clutch. Absolutely would try to bump this to 2 in the future, I think, if I were to rebuild this deck. But with Shinryu being everywhere, I wanted some form of monster hate, some form of backup removal, and the other 2 modes were just kind of useful. I did use it to revive Rydia one time. I've used it to break... I literally used every mode on this weekend. I broke Shinryu's with the Lighter Dark forward. I broke plenty of backups. I broke plenty of monsters. Just, this card is insanely good right now. Absolutely bump this to a 2nd copy in your decks. Full 3 copies of Remora and 2 copies of Leviathan as our like big oomph summons. Remora is just generally better because it can just remove the problem card. you end up in a situation with this deck where actually, I'll get to what the weakness of this deck and why I think it ended up being a poor choice for the weekend. But Remora was intended to fix that weakness. It just didn't do its job quite well enough because generally early Remoras end up being CP to play your Sarah down. Um, Leviathan 6 is obviously a fantastic card, but it doesn't do what Remora does as far as getting the forward out of the game and on to the next thing you have to do. It just puts it back in hand. For our backup lineup, the most important one is, of course, Sarah. You could go for either Kolka or Princess Sarah. One of my playtest partners really likes going Sarah into Kolka. I actually like playing this deck a little slower now. Maybe that comes back to bite me a little bit, but I always found that going Sarah into Kolka, you sacrifice so many cards in hand and so much hand advantage going for this that you kind of just end up you can just get massively punished. And the speed up isn't necessarily worth the extra turn because even then if you go Rydia Cecil, you only have 2 cards in hand at that point. It's very hard to maintain like the Amaterasus and the Mist Dragons to make that feel safe in my opinion. But if you have to go fast, it's still a good option to have, and Kolka is just a generally good thing to have in the deck. Princess Sarah, obviously, this was almost always going to be declared Earth. As our other Earth backup, we have 2 copies of Kryl. This was fantastic all weekend. Loved having the 2 copies of this. 1 copy of Ico as an EX burst that finds either Rydia or Garnet. And lastly, we have 2 copies of Loporrit and 1 copy of Artemisian. For a long time, this was 3 copies of Loporrit, but I kind of realized Artemisian was just turn 1 Loporrit that can help us dig for Sarah, which is the most important card in the deck. One of, I think, the best feelings in Final Fantasy right now is a turn 1 even costed backup into turn 2 another even cost backup and an odd cost. Artemisian into Sarah into Princess Sarah just does that, which just feels incredible. So at that point, then you have like you can go Rydia, Rosa, Cecil off of without using awkward CP out of hand or anything like that, right? It ends up being very, very good. So Rydia on the day was not a good day for Rydia, unfortunately. Let me pull up my matchup spread. So she went 3-5. She lost both of her games in the second round to Ice Lightning and then Mono Water. Mono Water is expected to be a bad matchup for Rydia. Lots of things just kind of incidentally deal with her. Things like Ash don't care about her protection. Cards like Atomos are very good at getting Rydia off the field. Cards like Leviathan, any Leviathan, like a bounce spell, is very good against Rydia. It resets the counters on her, makes you have to replay her. That was an expected bad matchup, but one that I figured the deck could potentially play through and win. Did not ever work out that way, unfortunately, but it was a possibility. The Ice Lightning game, I probably just botched, to be totally honest. I was very ahead. And I felt like because of the way discard tends to play into Rydia, my opponent had their backups curved and everything else, and I was very behind on that. I wanted to push damage and get out of there relatively quickly. I ended up getting about 25 cards into my deck and didn't see any copies of Amaterasu. Rydia got sniped by a Sephiroth, and the game ended up just kind of devolving from there, unfortunately. Ice Lightning is a matchup where Water Cecil is very good. It's just a matchup that I just didn't have enough experience or practice in, probably. I think it's probably Rydia favored, but it's just a matchup I've never been particularly good at playing into. Ultimately, it is what it is. That was probably the round that actually cost me my top cut, was losing in round 2. But my opponent was great, and when you get outplayed, you get outplayed, and that's just kind of what happened there. She beat Ninjas in round 3. That was actually a pretty close game. Really exacerbated one of the issues that I found with the deck, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. She lost to Leo. Leo's another very difficult matchup. Again, it's Mono Water, and all the issues with Mono Water exist, except also Leo scales like crazy, so you have to kill them quickly, and this deck was not very good at that this weekend. She beat Samurais, which was a very good expected matchup for her. Didn't really expect to run into Samurais, but like Mono Fire wasn't out of the question. And Rydia just tends to be very good in that type of matchup. She lost to Earth Lightning Chaos Arc and Mono Water from the eventual national champion, Ryan Chen. Once again, major congratulations on a fantastic win. Earth Lightning Chaos Arc has always been like a tricky one. You can kind of just run away with the game if you have like a Mott at the right time, but uh, Ryan went turn one, like he saw what I was up to and goes, okay, fine. Rydia, Seymour, search 1 CP Ramu. You sure you want to commit that Rydia to the field? And just put me in an awkward situation where I had to have 2 Rydias in hand before I could commit to one. Uh, again, very solid tech choice. Absolutely correct to do so, but without any real form of haste, I can't force that card off of his deck. Mono Water was probably the closest match of the losses. This was one that very easily I could have walked with, and with just like very slight deck list changes, I probably could have. Early game, I got very ahead. I ended up going Rydia, Rosa, Cecil, and with an Amat in hand. Had to burn the first Amat to protect Rydia. Drew a second Amat. Had to burn that Amat to protect Rydia. At that point, I really needed to look to establish an Une, and I think I just wasn't able to do so. Ended up getting burned out in my deck pretty fast due to having to use a lot of good summons, and I got locked behind a combination of Ash being bigger than my entire forward lineup. Without Remora, it's very difficult to just properly remove an Ash, right? I don't have a convincing out. Even something like a Riku will put the Ash on top of the deck, at which point it becomes a freaking EX burst. Like, um, Tenebrous Blast is 8k. It's not quite enough to kill. You have to double Luminous Blast. Just ugh. You don't really want to bounce it. Easily Ash was the biggest problem card for the deck all weekend. And then I got locked under a Fiend and just blanked. I literally had at one point had 7 cards in hand, and I did not have a way to get the Fiend off the field correctly. There was no way to go all my Kusiths got burned early, so I couldn't go Kusith to pop the Fiend's summon negate, and then Remora to get it off the field. It was bad. Damage 5 just was unable to. I was like, well, I can Amat it, cast a summon or target it and then get an Amat off, and then I realized that the Amat was not going to actually do damage because the Fiend goes to a 9k with the Minwu effect. It was rough. Kind of was praying for a Riku EX for salvation and just never saw one, unfortunately. Honestly, that was maybe the other thing about the deck this weekend is it's on 16 EX burst. I think I got one that I didn't put there myself with a Levy 3. Just was not lucky in the slightest with that. There's nothing you can do about that. The EX density in this deck is high enough to deal with aggro, but it still is relying on a random element at the end of the day. And I tried not to put too many cards in there because they had EX burst. I put them in there because they were generally good cards. There's a lot of EX synergy thanks to Levy 3, but it's not the only reason to play the deck, right? It's not why it's in the deck. It would be in the deck if it wasn't an EX burst. And its last matchup was against a Mono Earth Monsters list, where on turn 3 I got Rydia, Cecil, into Wind Cecil, into Kryl, pull back Fenrir, break it back up in a Shinryu with a Mott in hand, and then the turn after that I played an Une, and my opponent just never was going to get back from that. They didn't have efficient enough removal for Une, and Une for Fenrir with Rydia on field was just the end of the game. All in all, I think the deck is still very, very good, but there were a lot of issues that I would have changed coming out of the event now. Biggest thing is that because the body size caps at 9k, and it caps on 9k on the worst forwards to it to cap on. You're not using this Cecil for very long most of the time, and Une should never be attacking unless it's literally to do the 7th point of damage. So we cap out at 8k, and that's just a problem in the current format. You can't get over Ash, you can't get over 5 CP Lock, you can't get over Mog 6. I really think this deck was hurting for the lack of Warrior of Light and the 10k body it provided, or the Sophie and the size that Sophie gets to very naturally, while also Sophie would have dealt with that mono water match that I lost very easily by just burning the opponent rather than saying, I'm not going to get over this, but that's fine, I don't have to. I'm just going to win the game by hanging out. Definitely would have found room for Sophie, and I probably cut the Rikus for a Warrior of Light package instead. You end up just kind of in the situation where you have to win for a very, very long period of time because you have to stick the Rydia, stick the Cecil, stick the Porum, and then you have to either get the Porum to 3 counters, which takes 3 turns of winning the game, like of them saying, I can't clear your Porum and your Rydia, which is doable, but it's very difficult. Or you have to be like, stick the Une with the Remora and the Amaterasu, right? Like it just ends up being very difficult, and you give your opponent a lot of time to draw into their Shinryu, into their Ash, into getting their backups down. It just ended up being a poor choice for the weekend, unfortunately. Again, still a good deck. Still one that I think has a lot of potential moving forward. Just was not a very favorable room to it. And a lot of the expected matchups I was expected to face. I didn't see any 13 at all on the weekend. I didn't see nearly as much like Rainbow, Warrior of Light, or anything like that. Just a lot of decks that just would have done, this deck would have done well into and preyed on that it didn't get there. And still, Rydia only lost to what I would consider to be its bad matchups, right? Lost to Mono Water 3 times and Earth Lightning Chaos Arc once, right? But that still means that I should have expected, and I even said going into the event that Mono Water I thought would be the most likely deck played, period. But I didn't think there would be too many players that would run 2 decks that beat Rydia and Mono Lightning. Ryan Chen happened to be on 2 decks that beat Rydia, and Rydia was going to struggle against both of them. So we're at 21 minutes here. Let's go ahead and do the normal thing that I like doing. So if you haven't done this before, FF Decks is a great play this deck feature. We're going to go run through a couple test hands. I'll kind of walk you through what I'm looking for when I'm playing the deck. So this hand doesn't have Sarah, and it doesn't have a way to get a Rosa Rydia powered up on turn 1. So I would mulligan this. This has a Sarah, which is great. Also has a Kolka, which is really nice. Let's go get our first turn draw. And the Cecil. Jeesh, this hand is absolutely wildly good. So we want to get the Sarah down. And the hard thing here, I want to keep this Leviathan, but I want to keep the Loporrit as well. I think it has to be Leviathan and Leviathan here, but I'm not particularly happy about it. So I'm going to get the Princess Sarah. It's probably a hand I'm going to play a little bit slower, just kind of how I like playing the deck right now. I know Sam and Hoods like playing it a lot faster than I do, but I like the ability to maintain hand advantage while playing the deck. So we go this for the Princess Sarah. And we can get the Kolka down, which I think we probably should do because I want to get the Rydia into play. It's probably the Une and the Cecil here. Une going is a little bit unfortunate, but Loporrit's a great neutral play off of Cecil if we have to. This will get us our Rydia as well, which is great. So, let's see what we draw here. So this is pretty nice. I can go this and this for Rydia. And then I can go play Porum, or I can play Cecil. So let's play the Cecil. Let's take a damage. Leviathan 3, that's fantastic. Let's draw 1, 2, and put 1 on the bottom of the deck. I do have the Kusith and the Porum. Both of these are actually kind of nice, I'll be honest. The Kusith can get me back the Ico, which is good. And Loporrit can get me the ability to draw 2, put 1. I'm going to say that my opponent's turn I can tag out the Cecil for win Cecil. And then we could play Loporrit for free. Loporrit allows us to draw 1, 2, and put 1 on the bottom of the deck, which is great. That gave us our Remora for our Rydia, so we actually have an interruption. And then we'll do 1 more turn to see what the top decks look like. Very nice. We have our Riku to get us a removal engine going. Admittedly, we're a little low on action, which is kind of scary. Something like... could also go like the Kusith for Ico, Ico for Garnet, Garnet for Levy is not bad here as well. But then the Levy isn't caster free because of the Kusith. So probably go something like this for this. For this, tap 1, 2, 3 for Ico. Let's get a Garnet, and then you have Garnet. We have 5 backups. We're totally scaled out. We have another Remora cast with Rydia as an interruption. We're kind of looking good, right? Let's do one more test hand. This is a strange one. I'd probably keep this because it has Artemisian. We do also have Rydia Porum if we need to go fast. Let's take a look here. I think in this situation, I'm going to just go for the Artemisian. And I'm going to mulligan both of the Porums for a draw 2. Okay, that's decent. Start turn. Do this for the Princess Sarah. Call Earth and pass. And then here we have... Cool, Rydia, Porum. Let's go Rydia for Rydia. Tap the 2 for a Porum. Porum. Draw, or cast the Levy, draw 1, draw 2. Put the Cecil on the bottom, and if we don't really want to use the Ico and the Kusith as EX bursts. And then from here, we can even go for the Laparate if we wanted to try to dig for an Amat. Might actually be worth it, to be honest. Yep, there's the Amat. Perfect. Put the Fenrir on the bottom of the deck. Now we have Amat Mistdragon. One more turn just to see what shows up. Kolka is great. You can go like Kolka for Garnet. Garnet get back the Amat if we need to. And kind of keep looping that Amat to protect our board for as long as possible. Kolka for Cecil is defensible as well. Could go like Mistdragon, Levy 6 for Cecil, play the Cecil to kind of keep that loop going. Definitely a lot of interesting options here for sure. But yeah, that is the Earth, Water, Rydia list from the weekend. Hope you guys enjoyed it and hearing my thought process on the list and kind of how it came to be. Again, huge thank you to Hood's Claw, Sam Prime, Rudrose, and everyone that has given me advice and talked about me with this list with me. But especially those 3 have been the main people that I've talked to for deck building and trying to get this list as good as it is. Again, I think this is a very clean list. It's gorgeous to see the number of 3 ofs and 2 ofs. It's very consistent. Just was not the right room for it on the weekend, which that happens sometimes. Thanks for watching, everybody.